it's Reagan, and today I'm here to film a video that it's kind of been a long time coming and something I've been really excited to film for a while now. And this video is basically going to be going through some of the most influential books in my life, and I wanted to find this in an interesting way. The books I'm about to show you sometimes may not even be some of my favorite books. A lot of them are, don't get me wrong. However, there are books that I either read at certain points of my life that were incredibly influential in terms of how I viewed things, or they introduced me to a genre or a type of book that I just have never read or experienced before, and it was just kind of a pivotal book in my reading experience. You get what I mean? But anyway, let's just go ahead and get started. I will say none of these books are in any particular order, but they all have a special place in my heart, so yes. The first book I'm going to talk about is incredibly obvious, and I'm sure is on a lot of people's lists, and that is Harry Potter, the Harry Potter series, man. This book series is probably, I know they said there's no particular order, but this is probably the most influential book in my life, and the fact that it's still impacting my life, even as I speak now. This novel is so impactful because I grew up with it, and I think that's a really strong thing to say. Like, I literally waited and anticipated the release of pretty much all of these books post book 3, and I just remember I grew up kind of with Harry in a lot of ways, and it's just the stories, the characters, the themes, the plots have stuck with me still, and this is a series I reread very often, and again, I know a lot of you can relate to that, so it's just a series that makes me the happiest. Anytime I read, anytime I watch any of the movies, anytime I talk about it with any of my friends or strangers, I'm always excited and willing to talk about Harry Potter. It always makes me happy and warm and excited without fail, so this is definitely just a book that is just such an integral part of my life that it obviously had to be on my list. The next book I'm going to talk about is a novel I read in high school, and it was the first classic I ever read that, I don't know, it just spoke to me in a way that just really, I felt very attached to it. I've read a lot of classics and I've loved a lot of them, but this particular novel just really, I just identified so much with the story and with the character, and that is Jane Eyre. I absolutely just love this book. My favorite quotes of all time are all from this book. The identity, the female presence in this book, legitimately, again, I think it was like a right place. I was a senior in high school. I was experiencing a lot of change and a lot of self-doubt, and just reading this novel and identifying so strongly with Jane, and just reading her story and loving her story, it's going to be one of my favorite books of all time forever. I don't actually own a copy of Jane Eyre, which sounds insane, I know, but I'm waiting for these guys to come out, and they exist. They're just only in Europe right now. But Jane Eyre is legitimately just one of the most profound stories in my life that I will love forever. The next book on my list might give people some pause, but it's on here because it is very important, and that is Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. Now you're probably like, what the hell, Reagan? I am not someone who would say Twilight is my favorite book of all time. I wouldn't even say it's that great of a novel, but when I read this book, and I think a lot of people can agree, this was so profoundly important. Not only did it introduce me to the YA genre in 6th grade when I read this, I didn't even know that genre existed. I didn't know these type of characters existed. It introduced me to that, but it also introduced me to something even more important than that in some ways, and introduced me to peers who also like to talk about books. I didn't even know a world existed where I could read something, because I've always been a big fan of reading, and then have someone to talk to about it with. And because a lot of my friends didn't read until they read Twilight, I finally got to like communicate and theorize. And ultimately, what I discovered in the Twilight craze period was that I loved talking to people about books, and that spark has fed ultimately into what I'm doing now, which is having a booktube channel where I talk about all different types of books, because in reading Twilight I realized that was something I loved to do. So Twilight is important, and it was very important for me. You can say what you will about it, but Twilight is tops. Next on the list, and I have this copy of it, but it's really Percy Jackson. This is The Lost Hero. It's not the first one, but Percy Jackson is super important to me because it was the first series I got incredibly into post Twilight. And I know that sounds funny, but I didn't really know about older kid fantasy. Granted, I was in 7th or 8th grade, besides Harry Potter. I just didn't know what was out there, and I stumbled upon Percy Jackson and I realized that there was a whole plethora of adventure and fantasy stories where the characters are there's a little more action that was in Twilight, and I realized that this is a genre that I absolutely love, and I still love because I still read this man's books every time they come out. So Percy Jackson was kind of just opened the door for me to discover fantasy, young adult fantasy, in just a different way that wasn't like paranormal fantasy. It was more like traditional fantasy, and that's what I really loved. Obviously there's a lot of books out there that came before this that were written in that style and genre, but it wasn't until I read Percy Jackson that I discovered those, so gotta love Percy. And aside from that, it also made me love and taught me so much about mythology and Greek mythology, and made me really appreciate that time period in history. So Percy Jackson also just taught me a lot of stuff, just generally. In a similar fashion, the next book I'm going to talk about is Bourne Book 1. The reason why this is on my list, besides the fact that this is hands down one of my favorite series of all time, that I, up until this point, was always so scared to read adult fantasy. I didn't think I was gonna get it. I thought it was too long and too laborious to get through. But I read this and I realized that no, that was dumb, Reagan. This is awesome, you can totally do it. And again, this is just another novel that opened the door for me to be able to read and find more stories that I love, like Bourne, and now I've read The Name of the Wind, and so many countless other fantasy stories that I love, but I don't think I would be able to have the confidence until after I read this book here. And the last book I'm going to talk about is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, and this is again one of my favorite books, and this is just a beautiful story all in all. And the reason why this is on the list is because I always read a lot of fantasy, but you know what I don't read a lot of, and I still don't read enough of? Literary fiction that just paints a beautiful story, that just is a story about characters and living and morality or whatever. There's themes that are important to digest. Up until I read this book, I had read very little, especially out of high school. It focused on genre fiction because I love it and I will always read it and I will always love it. But when I read this, I realized that there's just so many stories that I've been ignoring and I need to read more of because they just offer so many new fresh perspectives and just issues that I maybe hadn't thought about and things like that. And this is a story that deeply touched me and made me think so much in a way that I hadn't in so long when it came to literature, that I again just opened the door for me to read more adult literary fiction that I hadn't in the past. And I really thank this book for that, and this book is great. By the way, if you haven't read it, would definitely recommend. Alrighty guys, those are the most influential books I'd say in my life. There are some books that I left out on this list, so I might be making a part 2 in the future. Let me know down below if you'd be interested in that, and also let me know down below some of your most influential books. Just books that you read at pivotal moments of your life or introduce you to something you didn't realize that you loved so much. I would love to know. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!